This program has been made possible in part by the following sponsors. The Trial Lawyers Association of BC. The Vancouver Courier newspaper. KCM Wealth Management. Since the dreadful shooting in Newtown, Connecticut, where so many lovely young children and some wonderful dedicated teachers lost their lives, the discussion about guns, which has always been simmering just below the Yankee surface, is now on the table again. Of course, the debates are hot and heavy, as you would expect. And those debates, although they began in living rooms and at water coolers around the world the next day, those debates really became galvanized around President Obama's press conference of, what was it, a week or so ago. Here's a little piece of it in which he lays out the cornerstone of his plans.
First, it's time for Congress to require a universal background check for anyone trying to buy a gun. The law already requires licensed gun dealers to run background checks, and over the last 14 years, that's kept 1.5 million of the wrong people from getting their hands on a gun. But it's hard to enforce that law when as many as 40% of all gun purchases are conducted without a background check. That's not safe, that's not smart, it's not fair to responsible gun buyers or sellers. If you want to buy a gun, whether it's from a licensed dealer or a private seller, you should at least have to show you are not a felon or somebody legally prohibited from buying one. This is common sense. And an overwhelming majority of Americans agree with us on the need for universal background checks, including more than 70% of the National Rifle Association's members, according to one survey. So there's no reason we can't do this.
Our guest today in studio is Mark Lalonde, an old friend who began his working career with the Vancouver City Police and has been concerned with gun and safety issues for pretty much most of his working life. These days, he's a director of CKR Global Risk Management, or Risk Solutions, and he's responsible for international operations, travels. If I started listing the geography, say the world, he's gone everywhere. He's about to go everywhere, all over the world. And here in town, he is keyed into Kwantlen University's criminology department, and as well, he'll probably walk over from this conversation to the Board of Trade, where he's responsible for the board's community safety committee. Mark, great to see you as always.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
You're looking sharp, and you're not packing.
I've got a loaded pen.
Okay.
The pen is mightier, they say.
Yeah. So let's take a look at some of these are pretty tough issues, and we all have strong feelings about them. So, the president wants to ban military-style assault weapons and high-capacity magazines. Let's start with that. What do you make of that?
It's a tiny step. They did it before for 10 years, then they repealed it, or the ban ran out.
It ran out, and they didn't.
The Americans have an interesting approach to legislation, and things come and go.
Yes.
What this conversation is really missing is not the accessibility of the firearms, which is a massive issue in America, but why these events are happening. What were the warning signs? What were the behaviors? What were the gaps? Where did some of these people fall through the cracks, and why did they pick up that firearm?
Do you really believe that we are so equipped with our psychologists and school counselors and priests and rabbis and imams and so on that we can actually take note and do something of people who are going off the rails?
Not as well as we could and not as well as we should.
Yes.
There's one of the tragedies is every time we have one of these instances, wherever it is in the world,
yes,
investigation will show that there's people who said, well, you know, I kind of suspected, or I saw these behaviors, or here were some red flags.
Yes.
And they either weren't reported, or there weren't the systems and resources in place to help these people long before and ward off a problem.
And some of that, Mark, is just very human. Let's say it's your brother or your son, or and okay, so there's these blips of odd behavior. You don't want to think the worst of someone you love. I mean, this is my son, this is my brother, whoever, and you go, yeah, well, okay, but he's just having a bad week, or you know, his wife left him or something. It's hard to just go, gawk, you're really in trouble, buddy.
It's really hard for people that are in an intimate relationship often.
Yes.
They lack the vocabulary to be able to label a behavior or understand the behavior they're seeing, or there's filters or problems in place, or they don't want to think the worst, as you say. What we see though is at some point these people have been in school or they've been in other programs where there's professionals who have daily contact. In Canada, we're seeing a lot more training now at the secondary and especially the post-secondary level of being able to observe behaviors, signs and signals that there could be a problem, and then intervene early with services, whether it's mental health, social services, whatever the challenge is for this
Yes.
person.
Yeah.
Often these are temporary issues that can be addressed. Sometimes they're longer term. We're doing a better job in Canada. There's still a long way to go. I'm not entirely clear how that's segmented out in the States, because each of the 50 states is handling it somewhat differently.
Well, I'm intimately involved with how our health departments and governments are dealing with addictions, and I'm not very happy with how they work, so I don't know. I wouldn't be optimistic about that. But look, two things. One is thank you for bringing up that element, but let's go back to the hardware itself. If I Google AK-47 or whatever, in 0.0146 seconds, I get 900,000 shops that will mail me an automatic repeating assault rifle with giant magazines for $4.59. Now, I can't do that in Canada, can I?
You can apply for it. You can. I'm sure they'd be happy to take your money if you're from Canada.
Yeah. No, but I mean,
legally, it's not supposed to be shipped to you here in Canada. Legally,
Yes.
that's not supposed to happen.
and we don't have Canadian suppliers who will do that. That's what I mean.
Not that no.
Yeah,
You've
yeah.
got to go to the shop. You've got to show a license. There's paperwork. There's a process.
So why? Well, let's just stick with that hardware. Even I understand NRA arguments about, you know, hunting things, and even the Second Amendment, which I think they misuse and they misinterpret. But let's say they're right about all that. But these things are made for tearing human flesh. These things are made for war, for theater of war, right? For combat. Why would we give them to civilians walking down the street in Philadelphia?
It boggles the mind. I understand people who want to hunt. I understand the sporting aspect, or people that want to target shoot for competition purposes,
Yes.
for recreation, whatever the purpose. I can't get it through my mind why a private person, needs an assault-style rifle with a massive magazine and rapid fire. It's not in my frame of reference why somebody would want that. You mentioned the AK-47. It's been labeled the original weapon of mass destruction.
Yes.
That particular firearm has killed more people than any other tool invented by man.
Really? I did not
It
know
is
that.
the most produced firearm. It is the most readily available firearm in the world. And when we're looking at international peace indexes in other countries, one of the indices we look at is what's the current price of an AK-47 on the black market, as an indicator of how stable the country is.
And it is?
If it's really cheap,
Yeah.
it's readily available, nobody wants it, there's no demand. If it's getting up in price,
Yes.
there's stability issues, people are concerned, people want to arm themselves. So currently in Afghanistan, the last time I looked, a regular AK-47 is over $600-700. If it's got the shorter stock, it's $1,000. In other countries, you can get it for $50. So it's what's the demand. So we look at the price of that as an indicator of how stable a country is.
Yeah. You know, one of the subjects that's almost never discussed regularly in the media is what I believe is the biggest business in the world. What are the biggest businesses? Oil, pharmaceuticals, illegal drugs, and armaments. And I believe, now you can correct me if I'm wrong, because I've said it publicly in the past, that armaments is the biggest business ongoing in the world. and we rarely talk about it.
I wouldn't be surprised, and most countries in some way or another are heavily involved. Canada produces not necessarily firearms, we produce a variety of military equipment. We mine phosphate, which is used in part for explosives.
Our most successful company in Richmond just went from 2,000 to 5,000 employees, and a large part of their business is satellite information and so on, but in a sense, and sometimes literally, it's weaponry.
It has military applications, certainly.
Exactly.
It's a massive global industry.
So what does, I remember thinking this when Clinton was in office, what does a Bill Clinton or a Bush or Barack Obama do about those hundreds of thousands of employees in Tennessee who pack a lunch every day and go to the shop and do whatever it is to produce bullets and magazines and weaponry?
They're a part of the economy.
Yeah.
They're part of the tax base. They employ people. Some of these have dual purposes or dual use technology.
Yes.
Some of them are simply designed to kill or maim. It's an industry that nobody can afford to back away from.
And no one can afford politically to back away from.
Nobody can afford the workers are voters and
would,
taxpayers.
Why would the NRA, again, I'm not an NRA fan, but let's say I agreed with most of their propositions, which I don't, but let's say I did. Why would they even say, no, we should have the right to have these heavy-duty assault repeating weapons and large cartridge magazines? Why would they argue that? I don't get that part.
It's a unique culture. What I find amazing is the NRA only has about 5 or 6 million members.
Yes.
Out of a massive American population.
Yes.
So tiny little fraction of the population are members of the NRA.
Yeah.
They carry an exponential amount of political clout.
Huge.
Huge political clout.
And tons of loot, tons of money.
Lots of disposable income to lobby.
Yeah.
They're forced to be reckoned with.
So here's the president. Our first task as a society is keeping our children safe. We can't put this off any longer. 900 died at the end of a gun since Sandy Hook.
Over 80 a day die in America.
I was in Chicago in August for 5 days, loved it, felt perfectly safe. Of course, I felt safe. I was in safe neighborhoods. I got on the plane, I came home, and I read that 19 people were shot that day. Huh?
The American culture is so different from many other places, and
And so different from Canada, yes?
and so different from Canada. And,
Yes.
and I'm not a sociologist; I can't explain it.
Yes.
We see a massive prevalence of firearms in other countries who have the civil militia, such as Switzerland or Israel.
Yes.
Lots and lots of guns, not the same death rate. Not the same use of firearms for criminal purposes. I don't know what it is about the culture of violence and fear and aggression.
Yes.
It's a different world. And fortunately, I'm thrilled that I live here in Canada. I'm proud to be a Canadian citizen. We don't have those problems. We still have problems, not to the scale. We've had tragedies in schools in Canada.
But nothing like this.
L'École Polytechnique,
I was going to say, we've had 14 women killed, and that's commemorated.
Dawson College, Tabor, Alberta. It happens. It's rare. I think in our school systems now, we see many more preventative approaches and much better response protocols.
Let's take a little break. When we come back, we're going to look at, among other things, the fight between federal governments and states, because that strongly affects where this legislation may or may not go. DavidBerner.com is the site to go to, and take a breather and say hello to some of our friends who support us here on Shaw Community Television Cable 4. Back in a moment. In part by the following sponsors. The Vancouver Courier newspaper. KCM Wealth Management. The Trial Lawyers Association of BC. you are operating out of the White House, God help you. Here's some of the things you may have to struggle with. Just recently, a bill in the Wyoming legislature to block any federal limitations on firearms, such as an assault weapons ban. A ban would be guilty of a felony and face 5 years in prison. New York Times says this ludicrous bill would be laughable if the idea weren't spreading, and I could go through dozens and dozens, Mark Lalonde, of states who are trying to enact similar laws. Wisconsin actually allows guns in the public gallery that look down on the state assembly. Can you imagine guns in the ledge over in Victoria? State gun laws matter. Of the 10 states with the most restrictive laws, says the Times, 7 also have the lowest gun death rates. Amazing.
Something to be learned.
A fact. What would you do? Look, here's one governor who changed his position. Hickenlooper of Colorado, which has seen so much carnage. He changed his position to new restrictions, proposing universal background checks. Do universal background checks help? Is that important?
I just think it's common sense.
Okay.
The challenge is access to the databases and the depth you can go. And with privacy legislation in most countries now, most of these databases don't link. So we may be able to find if you've got a criminal record,
yes,
but we may not be able to find out if you've been committed to a mental health institution for a significant violent concern.
It's interesting that some of the technology, which really is available, is not catching up as quickly as it ought to, and it could. On my Android, I can accept your credit card now, and you can pay me to buy my book, okay? It's amazing. It takes a second, okay? I am now a bank. I'm now a retailer, okay? Whereas I should be able to walk into a hospital in Halifax and have them read my chart, you know, but it's not there yet. And one of the reasons is that everybody's fighting with each other. Similarly, with this kind of information, criminal investigation. Let's talk about 2 issues of toy guns. First of all, we have all these actual toy guns that look like guns. Is there some thought about...
No restriction on them whatsoever that I'm aware of.
And people have died because of this.
I'm familiar with police cases where police have shot somebody and tragically killed people who were playing with a toy gun. And they held it up in a threatening manner. The police officer feared for their life, perceived it to be a real firearm, and it was a replica, a toy, if you will. In my policing career, I experienced that, where I came extremely close to taking the life of somebody who turned out to be a developmentally disabled adult playing with a toy gun that looked like a real gun in a public park.
Oh boy.
Gave me nightmares for years.
Yeah. And our record, just as an aside, in VPD is so comically low of the use of firearms. I used to make this dreadful, morbid joke that the rounds we fire annually is what LAPD does before breakfast. That's basically true.
We're fortunate to live in the city. There's no doubt we're blessed.
Yeah.
Very low crime rate and a declining crime rate, similar to most of the developed world.
Okay, what about this really bizarre issue you raised before we went on air of guns for children?
The NRA is actively engaged, and firearms manufacturers in the states, trying to create the next generation of gun owners. So they're actively marketing to children, teenagers and children, lobbying for some states to change the legislation so a 10-year-old could go hunting legally with dad or some adult supervisor, hopefully. They're advertising and manufacturing guns for children as their first entry point into future lifelong firearms owners.
And we're not concerned at all with the fact that developmentally, children are not at a place yet where they're fully responsible. We all at the age of 19 drove crazily. We were all drinking too much. We were all doing all those crazy 19-year-old things that humans do, but we're going to give firearms to kids at 10 and 12 and so on and expect them to be responsible?
They lack the judgment, they lack the reasoning power, they lack the impulse control.
Impulse control, huge.
Under direct supervision, sure, we see safe firearms usage for children. On a range, there's an adult present. Creating your first entry-level mini AR-15 for children, it troubles me.
Mark, you have a sailboat. You have a 30-foot sailboat. You take your youngster out, and he or she works with you, you know, pulling sheets and doing stuff, right? Fair enough.
Yeah.
Do you ask Betty or Bobby to take the boat out at the age of 12? Probably not. Yeah. Okay. This is my favorite question of almost any guest on this show, and that is, if you had a magic wand, if you were king for a day, what kinds of things would you start
Wow.
to do to make this world a little safer? And I'm talking mostly, when I say this world, I'm talking about Canada and the U.S. more than anything. I know conditions vary all over the planet, but
I'd look at prevention. Much better services for struggling families, children at a young age, early diagnosis of issues that are going to come up that we can address early on.
Yes.
There's so many studies that show that more funding, more finance, health, social services, education at an early age generates $3 to $7 in savings for every dollar spent in the future. There's tons of studies out there, but we don't fund those programs as well as we could.
would you close off the accessibility of some weapons, like these big repeater
Oh, yeah.
weapons? You wouldn't
Oh,
have
yeah.
them.
Go to England.
Yes.
It's almost impossible for a private person to buy a rifle. Really, really hard to buy a shotgun. Almost impossible to buy a handgun.
What is the
Great
gun
i-
violence incidence?
Substantially lower than what we have here.
Yes.
They've got really tight control. They were far ahead of us in terms of licensing to buy ammunition, let alone a firearm. They were way ahead of us in terms of that.
Yes.
We're seeing declining gun ownership in North America. More urban population, less rural.
Yes, of course.
Less interest in firearms. So I think we're going to see that continue, hopefully. I don't want to ban guns. I understand sports people. I understand that interest level.
Now,
I just don't see the need for some of those weapons to be out there in the public use.
did I misunderstand you in a sort of jokey conversation we had over the phone a week or so ago? Would you have armed guards at schools in America?
Nobody can afford that. And what's that going to do? Faster response to the person coming in? Are you going to have five guards, one for all 5 doors of a school?
Yes.
Are we going to turn schools into jails? That's not the answer.
The
The answer is to get that person before they pick up the firearm. All we're doing then is reacting, and at massive cost, and at what change to a learning environment. I don't see the need for that.
The Kansas City Chiefs football player who shot his ex-girlfriend or mother of his child and then walked into the Chiefs front office in front of his coach and shot himself drunk. There was an example where a lot of people knew this kid was struggling. But in that case, the NRA immediately said, well, if she had a gun, she'd be alive today.
Hindsight's
Yeah.
2020. It's a massively debatable point.
The answer the NRA has for almost everything is
There's-
if everybody were armed.
There's a move to allow parishioners to carry firearms to Sunday morning service.
Excuse me?
Just in some states, just so that if somebody comes in shooting, the parishioners can fire back.
You know, I was just having a psychotic.
It's surreal.
I was having a psychotic break there for a minute
Yeah.
because I actually thought you said there's a move to have parishioners carry guns.
In some states, you can carry your firearm into Starbucks.
Well, that I understand. What's the phrase of the case where the guy in the gated community shot and killed somebody? What's that phrase?
The killing in Florida.
Yeah. To stand your ground. The stand your ground phrase. Does that make sense to you? A little
That's
bit.
been adopted by a number of states, and it's been used to justify some really horrific tragedies.
Yes.
The common law principle for Commonwealth countries is you're expected to use every available opportunity to back off, to retreat when you're under threat. The stand your ground philosophy, as I understand it in some states, is that you don't have to retreat, you can pull your gun and start shooting. So the stranger that shows up on your front doorstep on Halloween night that you're not expecting has been shot in some states.
Korean student who comes to
That's the
Texas,
story.
to study, loves America, wants to participate, so he goes out on Halloween, boom. 35 years ago, we're driving around in Palm Springs, and I say to my ex, to my then wife. I said, what does that mean, armed response? As usual, she looks at me like I'm an idiot. Says, it means they'll shoot you. That was 35 years ago. Not much has changed. We just got a minute left. Push for futuristic weapons. That was today, in today's paper. The weapon that identifies by your thumbprint or your sweat or whatever, your DNA. Does that make sense?
As a safety mechanism, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
I don't think the technology is there yet. The gun manufacturers don't like it.
Yes.
But it's an added safety mechanism, just as we put a breathalyzer on the car of a convicted drunk driver. It's an added safety mechanism.
Tell me, we just have 1 minute left. Tell me, in all your world travels, just reassure me that when you come back home, you're awfully happy to be home.
I almost kissed the ground.
Yeah.
I'm actually happy to see Canada Border Services at the airport.
Yes.
It's fabulous to come back to Canada. We are
Because-
so fortunate. Safe, secure, democratic, free speech. The lights stay on, you can drink the tap water, you can drive on the roads, and you don't see people running around, kids with guns. In some countries I go to, I see kids with guns.
And the one thing I point out to people all the time, look outside, no mortar shells. Yeah, Mark Lalonde, always great to
pleasure.
speak to you,
Thank
buddy.
you.
Okay, folks, that's it for today. Next week, being a 2,000-year-old man, I haven't booked this guest yet, but I know who it's going to be. Domestic violence is the subject, very much still with us, unfortunately. And well, we're glad that you are still with us, and we look forward to seeing you next time, right here on Shaw Community Television, Cable 4. Good night.